Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this conversation. We are really glad for you to be here today with us. We're going to talk about rewriting the rules that we inherited from the nonprofit system. Now, at the nonprofit Hive, we believe community is built through shared leadership, shared learning, and very honest conversations about how nonprofit work actually feels. And today's conversation is about naming what many of us have absorbed without ever maybe choosing it. So, before we dive deep into this topic, which I promise you we will, and hear from this incredible panel, I'm going to take a very quick moment just to introduce myself. My name is Loretta Turner, and I am a proud trusted Hive partner and nonprofit Hive advisory board member. I'm also the founder and organizational well-being strategist at Do Good Leadership Collective, where our focus is simply to help the helpers. We help social impact professionals do good and be well. I've had the great privilege of not only being a nonprofiteer myself, but also working intimately with nonprofit leaders on improving their leadership in this modern day social impact world. And what I hear frequently, and what I'm sure many of you already know, is that this is not an easy time to be in nonprofit work or social impact work. And now is also a very potent time to rewrite the rules, not just for the systems that we operate in, but the rules that we inherited from these systems. So whether you are joining us live or you're catching the replay, thank you so much for being here for this very important and timely conversation. Now, if you are live, hi, we'd love to know where you're tuning in from or what part of the nonprofit/social impact ecosystem you're connected to. So feel free to let us know where you're coming from in the chat. And please know that when it comes to the chat, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be polished. Your reflections, your reactions are all very, very welcome. So let me take a quick moment to thank our sponsor, our session sponsor, which is Eighth and Home by Naomi Hadaway. I know Naomi personally. She is an incredible human being. Her work in the sector reminds us of a very, very important truth that people leave and workplace transitions are hard. Eighth and Home offers advisory services and interim executive leadership for organizations ready to prioritize leaving well and professional development via online community cohorts of the Well Lab. So thank you, Naomi. Okay, so back to our focus. Like I mentioned, today's conversation explores the nonprofit rules many of us absorbed without questioning them, especially when it came to these survival habits around overwork, or self-sacrifice, or scarcity. I'm sure you are all familiar with some of those words. So we're going to talk about how these patterns maybe once helped us survive, but they may now be fueling our burnout, our isolation, our disconnection. We're going to examine what it really takes to unlearn these norms and ways of being, not just at the individual level, but across teams, in leadership, even with our funders, and of course, in systems. So now here is the best part, folks. I'm excited for our speakers to introduce themselves. Jacob, I'm going to hand it off to you first. You can kick us off by sharing your name, where you're based, and that could be where you are in the world or the role in your organization. And why don't you also tell us what drew you to this conversation?
Yes, thank you so much. So excited to be here. I'm Jacob Smith, the founding director of Composing Youth Mobility, and I'm currently based in Colorado. What drew me to this is burnout, is being in a space as a young professional. I've been a part of the nonprofit sector since 14 or 15, and really grew my career a part of youth serving organizations, serving on board of directors, doing consultancy, just going right down the path that you would expect someone to do until they lead into the executive leadership position. And I assumed these norms really early on as a youth leader. It was sort of expected for young people to do this, to stay up late at night and work on assignments, to be the person that responds to emails first, to be the person that connects with everyone in networking, and then has 30 people to network with after the session instead of just one or two. And so that's what drew me to this conversation, is really how we shift those norms that are really controlling how we show up as an adult in the nonprofit sector.
Yes, excellent, Jacob. I so appreciate your perspective and your lived experience in this space, and I'm really excited to dig in more. Kate, let's go to you next. Same thing, name, where you're based, role in organization. What drew you to this conversation? And let's also do a little bit of what Jacob did too, is maybe touch on one of those norms that you adopted for yourself as you got into this work.
Thank you so much. So my name is Kate Toth. I'm the Director of Coaching and Partner Success at YMCA Workwell. We are all about creating healthy, thriving organizations. And so I started my career, second job out was in the nonprofit world, and I've since then worked in the nonprofit and public sector spheres for more years than I care to admit on this call today. What really sort of drew me to this conversation is that in my coaching work with nonprofit leaders, questioning unwritten scripts, rules, assumptions, and unlearning are key tools that I use in that work. And I really come at this from the perspective of we can't fix what we don't think to question. And there is so much that we inherit and that we just bring along with us for the ride. And so I really believe it's time for a healthier nonprofit sector, and that takes collective effort to let go of what no longer serves us. And so, I mean, very many scripts that have been part of my journey, but I think, one of the ones that resonates most for me is that if you care, you'll live and breathe the mission.
Oof, that one's sticky.
It really is. Still working on that one.
Oh, Kate, thank you. I'm excited to come. I'm going to take another lap on all of these examples that we've shared. So I'm excited to touch on that one a little bit more too. Okay, Mary Ev, name, where you coming from? What brought you to this conversation?
Oh, sorry, Loretta. Hi, everyone. I'm Marie-Ève Monette. I'm the Director of Development at Sustainable Harvest International. I'm also the co-chair of the board at the People's Nonprofit Accelerator, an organization based in Portland, Oregon, where I'm located. We offer programming that removes barriers to access and improved access to professional development opportunities for nonprofit folks. And I'm a fundraising coach at Auxilia, and we're working specifically, for me anyway, alongside organizations that work in and alongside organizations in Africa. I am so glad to be here for this important conversation. What drew me to the topic is, like Jacob said, it's burnout. And like Kate said, it's the passion we bring to the work. That passion often comes from the fact that we come from the communities that we work alongside. We're personally impacted by the issues that we're working to resolve. And because of that, it just leads to a lot of overwork. For most of us, I would say. I used to be an academic before I dove in fully into the nonprofit sector, but I've been working alongside nonprofits for the past 16 years. And in academia, overwork is just an accepted norm. Even if you don't accept it, you have to dive into it. You feel like you don't have a choice. And so coming into the nonprofit sector, that felt like a very natural transition to continue overworking. But the thing is, for me, the well-being of our staff and ourselves should be our mission as well, just as much as taking care of our communities too. So I'm just really grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Oh, what a panel. What a panel. Okay, so Marie-Ève, I'm going to stay with you a little bit longer, and each of us are going to answer this question, but with your example, I heard that it's about overwork as this accepted norm. We were also talking before we came live about how important it is for these norms and behavior to change, and they have to change at the top, right? So my question to you is, when you think about this norm of overwork, something that you've inherited, share with us a little bit about how it came up for you or how it manifested for you as you started to lead others. And when did you notice that time, that moment where you did not want to give that to somebody else? You did not want anyone else to inherit what you had been taught.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to start by saying that there's not just one moment. There have been several. There will continue to be more because we're constantly learning and evolving and wanting to do better. Part of my answer, I'd like part of my answer to be around paid time off. I'm a fundraiser, and so paid time off, we just finished the holidays a month ago. That's just not a thing for fundraisers in the nonprofit sector. The holidays, you work through it. If you're an ED, a founder, you work through the holidays. It's just not time that you should have off. In the nonprofit sector generally as well, in my experience, and I know that it's been the experience of many too, when you ask for paid time off, you need to have an assignment coverage plan. You need to be prepared. And then if leadership is okay with that, then they will approve your request. And so this leads me to an example I want to share of this year in my particular role. And the staff that I work with know that, I'm sharing this today also. We're working on our human resources policies this year. And when I first started after August, I shared what our policies would be around requesting PTO. And I shared an email saying, you need to have a plan when you make the request. And then I sent an email on the Monday after that because it stayed in my head. And I thought, this is what my previous bosses or supervisors expected from me. I don't want to do this. People have fought for labor rights and for time off in this country and around the world. It is a right in Canada, at the very least. It is a right in some states around the United States. We're still working on making that universal, but people shouldn't deserve or shouldn't be expected to request that paid time off with additional work. It should be given to them.
Yes.
And then after it's given, then you make a plan with your staff to make sure that their work is covered. And so I sent an email on the Monday and I said, I apologize. This is not what I should have sent. I should have sent this. This is how I want to function moving forward. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to talk. So that moment was a key moment. But again, I've had many. I'm going to have more in the future. It's about having that realization, but also admitting to making mistakes and wanting to do better too.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. Thank you for modeling that for us. I'm going to ask everyone to hold their claps and their finger snaps because I'm sure we're about to get some more really amazing examples of how this not only shaped our leadership, but also how it encouraged us to transform our leadership and do things differently. Jacob, I'm going to go to you next. You gave us a couple great examples. The one that popped up for me is the norm of answering emails late. So how did that then impact your leadership when you had an opportunity to mobilize or motivate others? And at what moment did that light bulb go off and you said to yourself, I don't think I want to do it this way?
Yeah, it's continued to go off. It's about being in that moment, like you said. First, it's acknowledging that, I acknowledge the youth leadership perspective and how that is shaped at such an early age and how that determines quite a bit of, we're in a system where oftentimes sending the emails late is what gets you the job. It's what gets you the, not necessarily just sending the emails late, but that sort of behavior of sort of doing your best and being that top leader. I can probably name maybe 2 programs. I've been a part of a lot of youth organizations, maybe 2 that brought up health and wellness as part of your leadership journey. And that is sort of the first root issue, is that we're still training a generation to engage in leadership in a way that isn't sustainable for ourselves and for communities. But at the age of 25, I led an organization that was 25 years old. So took on that opportunity. And I remember me trying to fix all of the things and not letting it get to staff. And that was unsustainable within itself. All of the root issues before I came on, and not allowing it to get to staff. And eventually it got to a point to where I'm like, okay, we're taking a week off. I mean, I'm grateful for the practices of that. Could have been better, but we took a week off no emails, no responses, nothing. We prepared partners, staff, donors, everyone, and said, hey, for a week, you're not going to hear from us, see us, do anything. And that was the first time my friend hid my laptop. Like completely hid my laptop just to make sure I was not going to check my email. And from there, we did it 2 other times. But I think the deeper recognition was we had all of the practices. We had a lot of practices. We had, unlimited paid time off, worker schedule. But it really came to the root of like, what is our philosophy about practicing this in the way that we show up for other stakeholders? And that really determined, in retrospect, that determines how we show up internally. It's like how we communicate that. And I did lead to burnout because ultimately if other people are still expecting that same high level of commitment, that then it will create this bottleneck where we're not able to actually reflect that internally.
Right. Jacob, thank you so much. And thank you for touching on that values piece. This is something I've been questioning probably for at least a decade, that so many of our organizations outward facing have these very strong values around well-being and care and health. And then somehow there's a blockade to apply that inward. So thank you for showing us and modeling for us how you did that work of saying, if we're doing it out there, why can't it happen in here? Okay, Kate, same question. You gave us a particularly spicy norm around if you care, you'll live and breathe the mission. So how did this show up for you in your leadership? What was the moment or moments when you started to question it?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I have the great privilege of working with nonprofit leaders across Canada who care very deeply about their employees and yet struggle to model for them. So I can really relate to those examples that were shared by my fellow panelists around what are we modeling for people, because it's all well and good to say, you can disconnect, like please disconnect from your phone and your email when you are on vacation, please do that. And those senior leaders, not even for a day, right? Like really struggling with that. And so I think it really comes back to that spicy norm of if you care, you'll live and breathe the mission, right? This idea of hours worked and and not disconnecting shows how much you care. And of course, that isn't sustainable. And so at Workwell, we do our very best to model this, but we also are very authentic about the way that it shows up. We're a small team. We are always trying to be well-being first, but we have to hustle hard sometimes too. So all of those pieces come into play. But I joined Workwell because I wanted to help organizations question these inherited rules. And I think it's really important to recognize that every team and organization has a culture. The real question is whether we're co-creating it intentionally based on how we want to work together, or are we just inheriting it by default? And despite the fact that my work is all about creating something better, I am not immune to that norm, that one particularly myself. And I really spent 2025 doing a lot of soul searching and learning how to create some emotional space for myself between the work and my identity. Not because I care less, but because caring sustainably matters, both for me, for my colleagues, and for all of the wonderful organizations we work with.
Excellent, excellent. Folks, I promise you this live isn't over, but I do want to take a moment to give some finger snaps and claps, because what this panel just modeled for us is something that is not easy to say, that not only do we inherit stuff, but once it's ours and it's embedded into our bodies and we've embodied it, we then naturally, consciously or unconsciously, give it to others, right? And the work to not pass down these rules is to do the inner work, to hold ourselves accountable, to check ourselves, to be open to being checked. And so just thank you, each of you, for sharing this and modeling this for us, because this is truly where it begins. Okay, our next question, Jacob, I'm going to go to you first. We talked a little bit at the top about how these behaviors can be really rooted in our need to survive, right? The overworking, the self sacrifice, the hyper responsibility, very connected to survival instincts. My question for you to kick us off, how do we know the difference between what is truly necessary for our survival? When I say survival, I mean the survival and preservation of ourselves, but also the survival and preservation of the organization. So, how do we tell the difference between when we and the organization need to do this behavior to keep our doors open and to make it versus when we're behaving in ways that just aren't helpful or they're even causing harm to ourselves or others around us?
Yeah, I think one sort of anchor that I will make in mentioning this is that I live with a chronic disability, a traumatic brain injury that shows up in many different ways, and can show up in the workplace. And it wasn't until 2025 that I realized some of the deep rooted nonprofit practices that was in conflict with how I was able to care for myself. There's one thing to say, hey, we have these metrics and we're only doing this every month. And there's another thing to say that I may have, my symptoms may show up at any time. And how are we creating a workplace culture that acknowledges that people show up as their whole selves at any given moment? And we need to have the type of flexibility or the type of environment that embraces those changes. And so some of those behaviors, I think, are the self-sacrifice. As a youth leader, it was like, well, if I do this now, if I write this grant, or if I connect with this partner and I do all of this now, then I will have the opportunity to take rest later. And really thinking about that is sort of the common practice that we engage with so much. And now, even in reflection now and building, composing youth mobility, I have had to acknowledge some of the things that I actually do not want to take on as a founder. And I think even just rewriting some of the ways, some of the titles and responsibilities to even flexibility and saying, okay, well, if we need to have flexible work schedules and flexible meetings, how do we create the workplace culture where it does not impact how other people are able to show up, but we're able to embrace that flexibility. And I think the survival really comes down to looking at yourselves first.
Mhm.
Looking at, what outside of your day-to-day work, what is consuming or making it such a all your eggs in the basket kind of showing up at work, to where you have to show up at work 300% because of other things in your life impacting you.
Mhm.
And I think we have to acknowledge that in the nonprofit sector, that we have complex lives.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Jacob. And also thank you for the vulnerability, sharing with us, the life and lived experience that you have that runs parallel to and obviously very much intersects with your work, which is having to, face medical challenges, right? So our work is not isolated. We don't just show up to work and everything else in the background disappears. So thank you for reminding us of that and how these behaviors have to not only be helping us be better leaders in our workplace, but also better leaders outside of work as well. So thank you. Okay, same question. Mary-Eva, we're going to go over to you. Let's see here. Yeah, many of the behaviors that helped us to once survive, the overworking, the self-sacrifice. How do we know the difference between when this is necessary versus this truly isn't serving me or my people anymore?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and Jacob for sharing that vulnerability as well. And it's inspiring me to share a bit of mine too. All I do in my work, whether it's working with staff, with donors, with funders, I take a trauma-informed approach to the work. I am a survivor of intimate partner violence, and so navigating trauma, living with that every day. So it's not a physical chronic disease that I have or illness, but it is something that I have to live with every day. And depending on what's happening in the world or in my life, there are things that might be triggering me to figure out how to show up and do the best that I can at work. And I'm also very conscious that people bring their own traumas to work. We're living at a time right now where just everything is on fire in our society and in the world. And so bringing that trauma-informed approach is just super important, because hyper responsibility, self-sacrifice, overworking, those are all not in every case, obviously, but those can all be results of having experienced trauma in your childhood and or in your adulthood. They are ways of feeling like you're in control. They are ways of feeling like you're going to make sure that nobody else goes through what you've been through before. And so it feels like it's something that is helpful. And perhaps it was helpful at one time when you were going through that experience, through that traumatic moment in your life. But we have to keep thinking about, is it still helpful for me now? And also, how am I passing this along to others? These reactions that served me in the past, how am I passing that hyper responsibility, that overwork culture in the space that I'm in my leadership, and how I show up? And I think the answer to that is our own personal work that we have to do with ourselves, the healing that we have to do, because if we don't heal ourselves, we're not going to be able to bring that healing, restorative approach to our work. And it's just building a community of care. I read an article in the Nonprofit Quarterly recently, it came out in January, that mentioned that we need to create an infrastructure and resources of collective care. And part of that is what Jacob was saying. It's not just about having the practices in place, but also the philosophy, the values, and actually showing up and acting on those values and those practices. And that own personal work as well is learning to receive that care ourselves as people. For those of us that have experienced trauma, trusting others to care for us can be extremely difficult. And so what you were saying, Jacob, about kind of filtering all the emails so that it wouldn't trickle down to your staff, I totally get that, because you want to protect your community, but the load that you take on your shoulders while you're caring for everybody else becomes so heavy that you're actually damaging yourself in the process. So creating a community of care, yes, it's creating that organizational mentality, practices, etc., but it's also learning to open ourselves up to others caring for us too. That is something that I'm struggling still to this day. I think that might be one of my challenges for the rest of my life, but I think it's just so key that we learn to take care of each other and not just of others.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you so much, especially for touching on this trauma-informed lens, because this is hugely important to how we unlearn a lot of these things we inherited. Okay, Kate, same question. How do you know when this is a necessary thing to activate these survival instincts versus it's time to shed it, it's time to unlearn it?
I think so much of this stems from a scarcity mindset that, again, we don't think to question, right? Like I think about my own struggles to say no to projects, to pieces of work that come in. And then, of course, all of the organizations that we work with as well. I think about, we have a service that I'm quietly trying to put to bed. And yet every time somebody comes and knocks on the door, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should just do that. Right. And so it comes around again and again. And so that idea of survival mode can be real, but I think the difference is whether it's temporary and chosen versus constant and expected.
Very nice.
If there's no recovery or choice, it's likely causing harm. And I wonder how often we don't realize when survival mode has quietly become the job description.
That is something. That is. I just have to point out that is. If everyone in the nonprofit sector could get a poster delivered to them that says that, then I would support that, because I think it really speaks to knowing the difference and knowing that a lot of times we go into organizations that are built for survival mode.
Wow. Thank you, Kate. That was truly some bars right there. I know that this is being recorded. I cannot wait to listen back to write down those pieces specifically. And Kate, I'm going to stay with you a little while longer. What I picked up from the responses to this last question reminded me of this quote that I have to come back to again and again in the spaces where, quite frankly, like I get support clinically, right? Because outside of my work, I also need to make sure I'm taken care of, and I do that through making sure I have access to mental health care. But something I talk about frequently with my supports is that our trauma is not our fault, but it is very much our responsibility. And I heard so much in this conversation that in our leadership, we've got to be accountable to ourselves. We've got to be doing everything we can on an individual level to make sure that we are right by ourselves and make sure that we are good with ourselves. But the question I want us to ask is, how do we also think about this work on a systemic level and take it outside of ourselves as well? And again, Kate, we'll start here with you. We know that this unlearning process is important to do individually, but we also know that it cannot happen in isolation. Mm-hmm. When we recognize that these norms show up within ourselves, but also with our colleagues, with our boards, maybe even with the people that we are asking for funds from within the entire ecosystem, what does it take to challenge it? It's one thing to see it within ourselves and to do the work at home, but when we're ready to go out and to model and mirror it to others, how do you do that?
I think it's really challenging, right? Because you think about, where the norms are coming from. They're structural, they're systemic, they're societal, right? And so there's a piece of that is, I think, truly unexamined at the societal level. And what kind of society do we want to live in as we go forward? So there's a piece there. And the way that I think that they show up inside organizations are things like reporting expectations, timelines that don't allow for recovery, growth goals that outpace capacity. I was speaking to one of our partners recently, and they're going through some challenges with a funder who doesn't seem to understand the nature of the work that they are funding. And it's really causing some challenges and a disconnect. And I think, a breakdown in trust perhaps on both sides. And so how do they navigate that space? And so I don't think that we're intending to cause harm through these sorts of structures and norms. But if we don't take that step back and say, what are the norms or assumptions underlying this practice, this, whatever it is we might be doing, we really, again, we can't fix what we don't think to question. And so that collective change starts when we make the truth speakable, because there's a fear element to this, right? If I have a direct conversation with my funder, are they going to continue to fund me? And then we get back into that survival mode piece. And so those things are very real, which is why it takes collective, brave conversations. How do we decide together what we're going to create? Mm-hmm. And this means we need to make some hard decisions about what we're going to stop doing as well.
And I appreciate the emphasis on togetherness. And I appreciate the example that you've given about philanthropy and funders. I think often there is a gap, right? We are experiencing this and you are all perpetuating, some of these challenges. And I'm sure there's truth in that. And what does it look like to have a conversation together and recognize we are part of a community that is impacted by a larger system, and unlearn and learn together? Excellent, excellent. Mary-Eve, let's go to you. Same question. What does it take to challenge the collective on this unlearning?
I think spaces like this, the conversation we're having today, just sharing more about what it looks like in our bodies, in our minds, in our lives, and thinking and talking through how we can bring changes in our workspace. Organizationally speaking, it doesn't have to start with big changes. It may just be start using schedule send when you send an email at 9:30 or 11 at night. It might just be because I have a toddler. Sometimes I have to send that email at that time, but it's because I finished a bit earlier in the day to go pick her up at daycare. But by using that schedule send and making sure that it starts when the workday starts at your organization. You're normalizing that or those are the working hours. You're making a personal choice to send that email at that time. So it doesn't have to be big things that we change. At the organizational level, Jacob's mentioned it, Kate has mentioned it too. And then in terms of funders, we were talking about this with the call. I work both locally and in Portland and Oregon specifically, and also at the international level. At the international level, funders are all about scaling and growth and doing things bigger and better and more impact. But what is the cost of that? Well, first of all, the cost is depth. And that's something that local and regional organizations do really well in the US, is that we are community-based, community-rooted. So we know, and we're often we come from those communities.
Right.
And so the depth of the work that we do, it is informed by the lived experiences of our communities. And so we can respond better to them. At the international level, there's such a remove. Most of the people that work in these organizations don't live or come from the communities that we serve. And so it's all about growth and scaling. But one of the things that's across the board in the US and abroad as well is we're wanting more and more people from impacted communities to be in nonprofit, working and representing and leading these organizations. But apparently the impact that was happening to them, the things they were living in their communities, no longer matters once they're on nonprofit staff. And the well-being is just, they're no longer part of the mission because now they're part of the organization.
Wow.
And so having conversations with funders around staff well-being is the mission. It's not part of the mission, is the mission, because well-being is the mission of our communities, the mission of our organizations for our communities. And so I think talking to funders, and I want to mention for those of you who, I don't know if anybody's from California or based in California right now, the California Wellbeing Foundation offers a, what's it called? A sabbatical grant that you can apply for. I worked with an immigrant rights nonprofit who got one last year. We need to push for more of that in the funding space for time, especially for all of those of us that are frontline workers at the moment in the nonprofit space, to have that time for disconnect, to hide your computer for not just for a week, for 3 months, for 6 months, for more time, because especially for those of us that come from the communities that are most impacted, that moment of disconnect doesn't exist, because when we go home, it doesn't stop. You don't just turn it off. It continues when we go home. And so having those conversations with funders as well, for them to understand that lived experience and that depth is important. It continues, and we need to care about our staff just as much as our communities.
Yes.
Sorry, I think I went on a bit long. I get a bit passionate about this.
Beautifully said. And you drove home a point that Kate was sharing as well, that the folks that work at the organization are also the community that is being served, right? We are all part of the community. Okay, Jacob, you're taking us home with this one. What does it take? What does it look like to challenge the collective, to share with boards, teams, funders, that this unlearning needs to happen together?
Yeah, I will say two things over my time, which again, it tells something. When I've been a part of the nonprofit sector since 15, is it didn't take my parents, it didn't take my family, it didn't take my doctor, it didn't take anyone in my community, because most people in my community were just baffled at the fact that, I would never be off during breaks coming home, or during the typical time where folks would be off. I was never off, I was working. And that became a norm. But what really challenged sort of my outlook at work and how I showed up was my colleague. And when I started to express sort of what I was going through at a much more personal level, providing more transparency about how I showed up at work and sort of the reasons behind that, it created a culture in which they felt comfortable to say, hey, how about we try this? What do you think about this? And it clearly supported their journey in terms of how they showed up at work, but it sort of ignited a culture of us being able to really look at how do we create the possibilities now. And I think so much of our work in the nonprofit sector is really looking at, we work so much on plans that we don't even have the ability to sort of think about the possibilities and reimagine how work looks. And today I'm proud that even has showed up in so many ways to where I'm able to, even when I think about the possibilities, I'm able to have this sort of reoccurring way of being able to see the gaps in making those possibilities reality. So I'm able to see how, okay, if we have flexible meetings, how does that change my outlook when I approach Sunday and I look at my week ahead?
Right.
And now it's like, if my Mondays are not to me, then I am not going to have a successful week. And I've been able to recognize that. I've been able to recognize some of those skills and practices. And then I think I want to point out sort of the understanding whose community you're a part of. If you do not know what community that you're a part of, and if that then that is sort of the first sort of awareness. And if your funders do not know the community that you're a part of, if your colleagues do not know the community that you're a part of, then that has a direct reflection on how we create our workplace culture and how we show up. And I had to notice that because, I'm sitting here writing grants, housing insecure, and posting on LinkedIn. And I'm like, whoa, there's a gap here. And some of the work has to continue, but what is those things that we tell to ourselves that we just tell to ourselves to continue the work that we really need to think about changing? And it was in those moments where I was able to say, well, you know what? I don't appreciate LinkedIn in this moment. I actually appreciate me having a bed and having wellness. And so how can I make that happen without these social expectations?
Jacob, thank you. This was an incredibly rich conversation full of just beautiful lived experience. And again, modeling that like best practice, good leadership in today's era is about doing this vulnerable, accountable work and being willing to have these tricky, but also very courageous conversations with our communities and understanding who that community truly is. We are going to get wrapped up in just a couple of minutes here. To those who are live, please take any moment that you want here to ask a question, to share a resource. We won't be able to answer the questions out loud, but we will revisit this chat and make sure to answer them. So if there's anything that's on your mind that you don't think we covered or something that you just want to ask of the collective, please use the chat now. We'll be super thrilled to follow up with you all. For our panelists, I have one more question. And the answer, I would love it in the form of one word or one sentence, right? Something really simple, a takeaway here that we really want to offer. We often talk about this work as being a little bit deficit-based, right? We are dealing with scarcity. We are dealing with burnout. We are feeling like a lot is being taken from us. But as we start to practice having some accountability for ourselves and also wanting to teach this to others or help others unlearn this, what is the more affirmative word or language that we want to use as we start to paint the future of nonprofit work? So rather than saying we no longer want to be burnt out, what is the affirmation that we want there instead? We'll do it in one word or in one sentence. Marie-Eve, we'll start with you.
Collective care.
Perfectly said. Beautiful. How about you, Jacob?
Interdependence.
Lovely. And Kate?
Enough over endless.
Amazing. Another round of applause, some finger snaps for our panelists. Thank you, speakers, so much for your honesty, your insight, your love for your work, and also your love for wanting this work to look different in the future. To our audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging. Thank you to Naomi Hadaway and Eighth and Home for supporting this conversation. To continue to be involved with the nonprofit Hive, to be more involved in conversations like this, just keep following us on LinkedIn or follow us if you aren't already. And of course, please visit us at thenonprofithive.com for upcoming sessions and community offerings. Thank you all so much. Have a beautiful rest of your week. We are so excited to continue this conversation in the chat and elsewhere. And panelists, thank you again for sharing your love with us.